Welcome to day 16 of Shadowhunters month, and this is kind of a follow-up video to one I did earlier in the month. If you remember, back into the early days of Shadowhunters month, which feels like forever ago for me, I did a video which was 5 things the books did better than the show, and I mentioned it at the time, and we've reached that point where I said that I would be doing another video which was 5 things the show did better than the books, because obviously it's very much a give and take with different adaptations of things, so it's kind of only natural that when the show takes as much creative license as it does with the source material, it will change a lot of things up, for better or for worse. So we've kind of already spotlighted things that I preferred in the books, so now it's time to talk about a few things that I preferred in the show. So let's get into it. So at number 5, it's Luke. Luke Gowray, or Greymark, Lucian Greymark, however you want to, call him. This was a weird one for me with Luke, actually, because watching season 1 of the show, and even, most of the way into season 2, I think, I was like, why is Luke a main character in the show? What is his place? Because he normally appears in like one scene or two every couple of episodes, and they couldn't really find a place for him. But I think they've kind of resolved that issue quite a lot now. Still not perfect, but a lot better than it was, particularly in season 1. And it's the same in the books. Luke isn't a major character in the books. He's very much a supporting character. So when I kind of realised that Luke would be a main character in the show, I was thinking, that's a strange choice to have him be a main character. Maybe it's just to kind of have more of an age gap or age range in the main cast, I'm not sure. Because they changed up a lot about Luke in the show. They made him like a detective as opposed to like a guy who owns a bookstore. So they changed it quite significantly. But that doesn't really bother me. If anything, that does give him a bit more to do in the show, so it's probably a good thing. Considering he's a main cast member, it's probably for the best that they didn't make him a bookstore owner. But yeah, for a long time I feel like they didn't really know what to do with him, and what his place would be. But I feel like they fixed that eventually, and they really highlight his fatherly bond with Clary, and that's kind of a big focus when he's on screen, and I think the chemistry between all the actors and everything really helps sell that aspect of it. And I really like his relationship with Simon, and he had a really nice scene with Isabel in 3A, and he's had some amazing scenes with Maya as well, and some pretty cool action scenes, and having him have more of a presence in the show has allowed him to kind of be delved into a lot more than the books ever did. And it kind of showed and demonstrated the potential that Luke has as a character. So now I'm kind of reread the books and you're like, oh, I wish Luke was here for this, or I wish Luke could have sorted the situation out. Whereas he's kind of relegated to the background for a lot of the time in the books. So the show having Luke in such a bigger role allowed him to really be explored a lot more, and it showed that there could have been some really great character work in the books if Luke had had a bigger role. So that's the main reason why I feel Luke in the show is an improvement on his book counterpart. At number 4, it's Jace's family ties and like the exploration of who kind of Jace came from, I suppose, and what family he belongs to. I think personally for me, the books just dragged the story out a bit too long. And that does tie into another point in the list that I'll get onto a bit later. But there's only so much you can tease about things, and obviously the inclusion of the Inquisitor in the first couple of Shadowhunters books did help explore where Jason came from. But the thing that differentiates the books and the show for me is that the books killed the Inquisitor just as she found out Jace was like her grandchild. and she never got to have a chance to kind of build a sort of relationship with her grandson. And Jace kind of found out who she was after she'd sacrificed herself for him. Whereas in the show, we had the chance, they kept her alive a bit longer, so we had a chance to really explore that dynamic and to see what Jace was like with a living relative in his life. And I thought that was such a really nice idea to kind of do, and kind of grounds Jace a bit more with the character and really humanises him. And it was just really nice seeing his interactions with his grandmother and learning a bit more about his past in a way that the books just didn't explore. And granted, the show did still kill Imogen, and I kind of wish they kept her alive so they could explore the dynamic a lot more. But they still, however briefly, explored a relationship between Jace and a living relative and someone he could get really close to in his family and his bloodline. And I really appreciate that story choice that the show made. So that's kind of why I really like the way the show in particular dealt with Jace's family. At number 3 on the list, it's the villains. I do feel like this is kind of unfair, because of course some villains can be brought to life a lot better in live action than on the written page. But I think the handling of some of the villains in the show was just quite simply handled and written better than they were in the books on some occasions. It's kind of... the main villains I talk about are Valentine, Lilith, and Sebastian/Jonathan. And whereas I think Jonathan/Sebastian are equally as fantastic in the books and on the show, mainly due to Will Chu's performance on the show, because he was just outstanding, and I can't wait to see what Luke Baines brings to it in 3B. But as for Valentine and Lilith, I think both of those characters were done more justice in the show than in the books. It's kind of a similar story for Valentine for me. So obviously I watched season 1 of the show before I read any of the books, and I just wasn't really sold on Valentine as a villain. I didn't really find him particularly threatening or anything, and that was the same for the books, for basically all of the first 3 that he appeared in. But then the show kind of did some interesting stuff with Valentine, like the body swap with Magnus, delving into a bit more of the connection he had with Jace and Clary and Jonathan. And Alan Van Sprine gave a pretty cool performance as well throughout his tenure, and they even brought him back at the end of 3A, which I thought was a very interesting kind of move. So the show kind of tried new things to make Valentine maybe more interesting and give him a bit more depth, which I really appreciated. And we didn't get Valentine's kind of backstory in the books until Tales from the Shadowhunter Academy for the most part, whereas we got a lot more glimpse of that into the show. And while I don't think Valentine was particularly threatening in season 1 of the show, I think they greatly improved that in season 2. And I did kind of really buy into the threat he posed, which I don't think the books ever really quite reached for me, which is why I much prefer Jonathan as a villain. And then again, Lilith in the books I feel was very underused, and we didn't really get much of a character for her for the most part. She was very much working in the shadows and stuff, because I feel like the book she appeared in, City of Fallen Angels, was kind of more a character study and more a series of events than like having like this overall plot, which obviously was kind of what Lilith was part of. And then in the show, she was kind of the main focus of 3A. She was in basically every episode. Anna Hopkins absolutely killed the part. She was just awesome. I loved her in it, and I can't wait to hopefully see her again. And the show just made Lilith such an interesting and well-rounded and developed character, and so devious. I think the performance really does help elevate Lilith on the show, as opposed to Lilith in the books, because quite frankly, she just got more screen time on the show, and more development, and that really helped to kind of sell her as a villain in my eyes, and I really, really loved her being the antagonist of 3A. So, and then obviously Jonathan or Sebastian are just so brilliantly complex in both the books and the show, but Will Tudor's performance was just something else, and it's hard to go wrong with the character that interesting. but overall I think the show definitely handled a lot of its villains better than the books did. So number 2 on the list is Alec Lightwood. Kind of a similar vein to my previous list about 5 things the books did better, and I feel like book Jace was better than TV show Jace. For me, TV show Alec is superior to book Alec. And again, this is kind of slightly unfair because of Matthew Daddary's performance helps really bring the character to life, and the fact that we see Alec and have more kind of screen time for him to go through the motions, and we literally see him go through his thought processes, whereas we can't really read much into his thoughts by reading a book, for the most part. It just allows, by being on the TV show, it allows for us to get to know him much better as a character and become more well-rounded. And I feel like his journey to like coming out and his relationship with Magnus gets a lot more focus on the show than the books ever gave it. And I think that just helps make him a much easier character to connect to than he was in the books. Because a lot of the developments for him and his relationship with Magnus were kind of taking place off-screen. Like the entirety of book 4, Magnus and Alec were kind of on holiday for and didn't really show up until the end. Whereas they kind of changed that story for the show and kept them both there and just gave them new storylines to kind of have instead. So it's like a more consistent and constant character development for Alec on the show than there ever was in the books for me. And I still like Alec in the books, but I love Alec on the show. Matthew Daddary is brilliant, and the focus they give to him and Alec is just a really, really special thing that the books never really quite tapped into. And then number 1 on the list, and for me personally, what I think the show absolutely did better than the books was the whole Clay sibling angst incest deal. It's very much a subject up for contention, I think, whether or not you liked the whole plot line, with Clace apparently being siblings, even though they ultimately turned out not to be. What I enjoyed about the show is it didn't take them 3 novels to find out that they weren't siblings. It was episode 11 of season 2, where Clary found out and Jace found out the episode before that. So they kind of got over that hurdle a lot quicker, and even when they did think they were siblings, they weren't making out every 5 minutes and nearly sleeping together, even though they thought they were brother and sister like they do in the books. And it's naturally a very kind of uncomfortable storyline, which doesn't make it bad at all. I think it's an interesting kind of way to go. But the way Clary and Jace kind of behaved in the books to that revelation is still kind of like, it doesn't matter, we're in love, we can fool around even though we're brother and sister. I think that's kind of dodgy territory, and I'm glad the show for the most part really stayed away from that. Aside from the Sealy Court kiss, which kind of had to happen to kind of break up Clary and Simon's relationship, aside from that, once they found out that they were siblings, nothing happened between them until they found out that they actually weren't. And I think that was just a much more sensible and better way of going about that storyline, because it wasn't dragged out for 3 books. It only took like a season and a half for that. Well, not even that, because it was like episode 11 of season 1. They kind of found out that they were siblings, something like that. So that would have been, 13 episodes is all they thought that they were siblings for, so it wasn't that long at all. Whereas they kind of spent 2 whole books thinking that they were siblings, and yet still kind of acted on their feelings, which is a bit dodgy. So I really like how they wrapped up that side of the story much quickly. I cannot speak English. Much quicker than the books kind of handled it, and they didn't kind of stray into any dodgy or freaky or weird territory when they were still under the impression that they were brother and sister. And as a viewer, it's nice to have that be a bit more comfortable to watch, even though there's still a lot of angst going on. But you still don't feel weird when Clary and Jace kiss in the books thinking they're brother and sister, and you're like, oh good, I'm glad that they're getting it on. That brother and sister, I'm glad they're getting it on. Whereas I feel like you can root for them up a lot more cleanly in the show. I much prefer the way the show kind of handled that and gave more obstacles in their relationship than just their brother and sister, so they can't be together. It's just, for me as a viewer, it's a much more enjoyable, angsty experience, if that makes sense. I just think it was handled a lot more tentatively in the show, and they took a great deal of care to kind of get the balance right on that whole incest story, and I think that really paid off compared to how it was handled in the books. So yeah, that is my number one thing that I think personally the show did better than the books. So those were my top 5 things that the show did better than the books. Let me know what you enjoyed about the show compared to the books, or vice versa, because there's obviously the other video about it where I talk about what the books did better. So I wanted to kind of be fair and do a similar kind of video for both the books and the show. It just makes more sense. And obviously it's not an attack, because I still like a lot of what, the things I mentioned in this list. I still like what the books did with a lot of those. I just think there's a lot more kind of care taken in the show for some of them. And the only reason that there's an improvement on those things in the show is because the books exist in the first place. So, it's not kind of discrediting any of the work in the books. Hindsight is 20/20. So I'm glad that the show kind of did take its precautions with certain storyline elements and certain characters and stuff and try to improve them. And they succeeded in a lot of things, and there will be some things I've probably forgotten that I actually much prefer that the show did. But those are just the 5 that came to mind when I was planning this list. So yeah, let me know things you prefer about the show compared to the books. And until tomorrow's video, thanks for watching.